2022. Where am I at? As I've been watching different things going on in the world, this is it's just been an interesting. I had to take some time. The as I was going through, one of the things I've noticed was McConnell, who's most worried about Supreme Court expansion, as he was talking about why he did not want to vote for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court, has nothing to do with. And his argument was about packing the court. Well, this is rich coming from him. He is definitely his actions are in line with what would be considered theofascism, or if you don't want to use that, it is it's not just his actions, but his packing the court has been his life's work, and what he did with Obama. So he had Merrick Garland, then he got three judges onto the Supreme Court, so it's 6-3. Of those three, only two of those three should have been on, so it should have been a 5-4 court. Even using his own logic, it should still only have been a 5-4 court. So, and he put two highly ideological, theocratic persons on the court who believe, who don't believe in secularism. Personally, they believe in more a theocratic reasoning of of the of the founding of the nation, when it is actually a secular court, or a secular nation. It's the equivalence of saying, okay, Ilhan Omar putting on a bunch of Islamists. Same, same thing. From her actions, I do not think she is a secularist at all. I believe she will not, given the opportunity in the future, will not uphold secularism. But that's just from my observations. And she'll say that it's an opinion, but I have stated, I've straight up asked, and I still have not heard an answer. So therefore, it's an observation. So if President Biden was to extend the court to 11, it would not be the first time. I mean, if Biden can't do that, Congress does that. In other words, for that to happen, there would need to be a very large turnout to give the Democrats a majority in 22 and 24. If this is not done, if this very, very far right take over the country is not done, it's moving towards trying to be a either very theocratic and very top down in nature, and it'll be for decades, pretty much the way Jim Crow South was. And you still see the remnants of that today. Next, moving on to Ukraine. Mariupol is being surrounded, has been surrounded, and they're being starved out as Putin is flattening. Mariupol is it's a linchpin area. It's like Kiev in many ways. It's the from a emotional center of gravity point of view. It falls, then they can take their then they can take those the battle lines and start working their way towards Kiev. One of the things that I've noticed with Putin and looking at the history of the Ukraine, Kiev, the reason Kiev was so important to the Rus, Kiev is called Kievian Rus from what I've watched on different. When the fall of Constantinople happened, the Greek Orthodox Church was essentially in Kiev. The so that's why one of the reasons why Putin wants to say Ukraine doesn't exist, even though they have their own language and have been Ukraine on and off for a while, many for different centuries. The one of the things that Putin did was, in his consolidation of power, was turn towards the Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, which is a form of the Greek Orthodox Church. And it was funny. There's a one of the deaths that he was going to use is one of the priests has died. I guess I took one of their priests to battle with him, and so that he can try to make it his own little holy war, I guess. The Therefore making Kiev is one of the because it is one of the it's I guess it's the Agatha Sophia, the after the fall of Constantinople. I don't guess that's just the way it seems. The Greek Orthodox, you have the Coptics in Egypt, the Greek Orthodox, and then the Holy Roman Church in Rome. As far as Christendom, there's other sects too, but and then of ancient Christendom, original Christendom after the Council of Nicaea, and then after that you have the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther, and then of course then you have the Lutheranism, Calvinism, and all that others, and Episcopalianism within England. Then you get to the U.S. and you have Mormonism, which comes up. But then after the Great Awakening, which is really I think it's now as I've learned as I've been growing more in my own studies of Christian mysticism. I think it's more of the Great Falling Asleep than the Great Awakening, because then it went to that's where you get the more evangelical sects of Christianity, and it's less about the God within and more about the old and vengeful God without. But I still have much to learn, so that's just where my mind is, and you know, not just my mind, but there's other things as far as what I've learning and my own experiences are concerned, because the Pentecostal feeling and all this, and there's still much to learn. But and then and knowing that Unitarianism and Unitarian and Universalism were very much a big part of America before the founding, and there are definitely multiple persons, all founders who were Unitarian or Universalist. It's really making me believe more so the theosophical, well, maybe it is, soul of the United States has been hijacked to whereas for the for greed personally, because we're seeing these things. For instance, I saw Robert Reich posted something, that I still don't believe the minimum wage is $7.25. If it kept up with inflation, it would have said it would have been $60, which would have actually forced us to be more automated, have a higher education system, keep our workers super educated, so that way we can stay ahead of the curve. But by keeping the minimum wage low to a ridiculous amount, it's basically a theft of capital and productive use of capital from the average person. And then what they do, which is more insidious, is then they start talking about illegal immigrants. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a big fan of a person just rolling over the border. And but at the same time, the demonization of illegal immigrants has actually created more of a problem. It's made it's given too much power to the Mexican cartels, and then the corruption within Mexico, and then we create these gangs, and then we dump them in Guatemala, which then they take over Guatemala, and they pretty much decimate. We have helped decimate a multiple countries in South America because we can't see people as human beings. But on the other term, they're saying these things, and then they're not wanting to allow to go after the companies that hire these illegal immigrants. They'll go after illegal immigrants with all this force and yelling and screaming. So it's the whole, here's your emotion. It's those people over there. We'll give you the emotion. We'll wreck their lives, put them in jails, make money off of them, in fact, and they're in jail. But we're not going to go after the root of the cause, which is the persons who are hiring these people, or let's give them a slap on the wrist. So, from a capital perspective, it's not that big of a deal to hire the illegal immigrants. All right. So it's it's that whole psychopathy of give them the emotion, take the asset. So anytime you hear like, you see like you're thinking it's the same kind of thing. I meandered on that one. So back to back to Ukraine. One of the other situations is a political situation is the government of Ukraine, Zelensky's party has banned opposition parties and press. Any broadcast press has to broadcast government stuff. That's not cool at all. You don't say you want democracy and then when it's tough, you get rid of it. If anything, you should be preparing for voting, doubling down on democracy, still maintaining the rights of these other parties. And I kind of thinking I have a hypothesis of why this was done. And it's not an obvious reason, but I'm not going to go there. As far as broadcasting for what is necessary for I think government broadcast should only be in the morning, noon, and night. What's going on, and where we're going to go tomorrow. I mean, that's and the rest of the time, yeah, it's back and forth arguments and all that because once again, that's necessary for a vigorous democracy, and it's also necessary so you don't get this too. If you get disinformation, you have a set point to counter it, and it also lets you know the really what's going on in different battle spaces. So it's actually helps the populace harden where they need to be hardened or relaxed when they can be relaxed. This is very important as far as Mariupol is slowly being starved out. One of the things, conflict map, billion open. Yeah, This so let's go to these are as the water flows. You can see how it's created these. If the Mariupol, you see here all this, all these deep water ports. This is a deep water port, or places for deep for port, and it's right on the Russian border. You have a lot of these waterways. This is a psychological, and the contested regions in the east, a very psychological area, and it also, as some of the generals have stated, it will free up attacks, the ability to attack north once those forces are once I don't think anything will happen. I think Mariupol, Mariupol will if it falls, it'll be leveled. There will be nothing left. Basically, it'll be a genocide. If it can be helped, then it should be. But if it can't, if the forces cannot get down there, but anything I would suggest is that I know that people are doing this is attacking supply lines between these ports here and this land bridge, because but as long because if they can start encircling, you can see an old school encirclement happening here. And I say old school, I mean it's they're just going to start doing small chunks. You see that they're trying to do that to connect to here, come in, and then you start doing these. This is pretty much that was pretty much what the Nazis did in World War II, which is irony because it's the same uh, attack pattern that Shaka Zulu did to decimate the British. The so it's a tough fight, and there's a lot of looking at through the center of we know that that's the breadbasket. There's a lot of farmlands throughout this area. As as the ground, right now we're in spring, it's soggy ground. As summer comes, that will go up, and the ground will be harder. We'll just see what happens to the mechanized units of Russia and what they'll do. So, but the main thing is not to give up democracy in a time of hardship, because one of the things I'm noticing as Putin becomes more frustrated, China is still sitting in the background. They're trying to make their moves in the South China Sea, Indo Pacific, and those moves are in reading Xi Jinping. Well, still reading, just in the beginning. There's two. He harkens back to 5,000 years as far as the Chinese civilization. That puts it back at the time of the Egyptian civilization. And the Egyptian civilization comes from what I've read and stuff. Part there is a, a, a little known theory that they came after the fall of the first ziggurat at the Tower of Babylon, the Grand Ziggurat, that those persons then migrated to Egypt, and from Egypt, from the Nile, they built up Egypt. And then there's another That's the physical, and then the metaphysical is maybe Atlantean. But from the physical, but even then there is, because one of the things is there's monolithic areas in Japan, and so we there's that whole Atlantis theory. But from archaeological theories, the there was a migration from the Babylonian area to the Egyptian area. So Western civilization. We have Babylon, Egypt, and then the Chinese are saying they are civilization at the same time, and they're only continuous civilization. Well, Western civilization still is built upon the Egyptian civilization, just as as it's still built upon the Roman civilization and all these other different civilizations. We still use laws, Roman laws, and even Egyptian ideas within religions. So these things are still with us. And so what he and by hearkening back to this 5,000-year-old ideal, it is stating they are the only continuous, in their minds, true civilization. And you can see within these moves of taking over the Indo-Pacific, I think Indonesia stated that they were in a slow strangle with China, or communications, the government doing some leasing and then some military bases to put them right off the edge coast of Australia, which, from my reading, is to Australia to the Chinese is a it's like the old American West, wide open spaces, and interviews I've seen. It's kind of also they also view Africa as that way. As I've watched some interviews over the years, per different Chinese entrepreneurs, and also the way they've treated Africans in Africa and Caribbean and all this. So right now, there's Bloomberg showed that China, yeah, they are, because the West was doing hitman dollar diplomacy, so to speak, and debt trap diplomacy. Basically, it's the same thing as you know your your check cashing. You can get a loan, but it's going to cost you 400%. And that's the same kind of thing the West has been doing to these countries, the uh, especially since the breakup of the British Empire, colonialism. This is made worse that persons such as my family and myself, the brain drain of these companies, might as well call them companies, left, and it's because, well, anytime there's a revolution, the intellectuals are the first ones killed. That's just how it goes. You got to cut off the brains so that way you can rule the body. Is how that works out. That's why I'm viewed more of a threat by certain bigots, which I'll get to in a bit. So for the African, they were in some of these things. They're wondering, like with Africa, because China is actually doing infrastructure, but in that infrastructure, everything is, say, there was a rail line, part everything was in Chinese. There wasn't, say, we're building this and then, okay, it's in your country, so it's in your language or whatever. Even the Belt and Road, everything they do is in Chinese. It's not for the indigenous people. They know this. It's designed, they're laying these pieces of groundwork so they can uh, start moving more and more people. Kind of the same. If you want to, where they, if you want to know what they did, is what they're doing. One with the Uyghurs, because, well, it seems like Mecca, Medina Islam just can't seem to get along with anybody. They always there's but what they're doing is wrong, and it's that's the way the Chinese view that, and we also see them moving into Afghanistan because there's so many minerals. Thank you, 45. He did a great job of just handing that away. But we also know that, anyways, that's just a cluster totally because we also made so many errors and mistakes due to our inability to listen, and but also we're seeing what's happening with the Taliban. You know, why is the Muslim community not talking about that these women can't get, not saying this is an outrage? And that's and they where they say tell the girls they can go to school, and then they get there and they go, oh, you can't, haha. That's just wrong. And why is that not haram? Where the, during the Arab Spring, there was some videos where several different videos where a woman got caught out without a hijab, and then these dudes just did a mass rape, and but that was not that, but that was cool, right? You know, I'll be real. I have my problems with this religion. It's there's a beauty of it where he was still in Becca, or we call Petra, if the hypothesis is correct. And there is when he went to Medina, and from purely as a logical psychological process, it's cluster B. It's double speak. There's this one statement I remember listening to, and he said the something about on the sacred space and blah 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 under a woman's feet. Now, if it was during when he was in Becca, the first time when his wife was still alive, it would be, oh, that would be, that's a beautiful thing. There's, the feminine, the divine feminine, whatever, as presented as the feminine, as a woman. But if you then take it from cluster, if you say it was a cluster B, what do you say that there's no value and there's little value, and the only value is just barely under that person's foot. So anything else of them is no value. So understanding both positions is just a matter of switching a change of an emotion set to the language statement. Or watching Abba and preach, and I agree with it. There's the thing I was thinking about. It was like this woman. She was doing hijab porn or whatever, and then there's another woman. She was highly educated, and she and her I think her fiance or whatever. We're saying yes, we have certain disagree some things about that are in the Quran they thought were just kind of that make sense, and then he was saying, well, that's haram. Well, from maybe it's just my Western view, how are you to tell them their interpretation? It's always this top-down view, and it seems like they're always pissed off. All the Ayatollahs are all angry from my perspective. There's always this, like, the deeper they get into it, the angrier they get. You see a Wahhabism, very angry. You see MBS, he's not angry. No, that's he takes glee in the hatred that he spews. He takes glee in in his power, and not in a positive manner. He enjoys the pain that he put, sadistic pain. That's the eyes of a sadist. So this is from what we see as a Westerners, and we see from that religion. The very beauty of the initial turns always turns to this. The higher is beautiful, but the lower is always very horrific. And then it comes the whataboutism. Well, what about Christianity? Yep, get it. But at its higher states, it gives the choice and says, no, that's horrible. They are not using, it's not, that was not what was really said by the Christos. So, but, and so, but where I see within Islam from a Western perspective, it's they'll say that, but then they'll use taqiyya, and so it's a lie. So, but that's off into a rant. That's probably gonna means I can never see the pyramids of Giza because they'll try to kill me. That's the other thing about it. You don't. That's to me is you disagree, so you got to die. Even if it's something, then you'll come up. Because one thing it seems like there's always, if you disagree, then I could find something in the Quran to say, okay, that's haram, therefore you got to die. That's ridiculous. That's just doesn't make. That's just does not seem like something that the God of Israel would say. Because it keeps growing, and at the time that Islam came about, there should have been growth. Um, and then back speaking about Africa, the as far as all this tense, these projects, they come with a lot of surveillance. That could be stated with what happened with the African Union headquarters. They said, "Here's this. We're going to build you this great headquarters," and they bugged it. Every part of it, everything was bugged, and it was. That's a. I mean, you could look, and then you look at the way the Mongol horde controlled the steppes. They allowed these city states or these areas to keep their culture. They had to pay tribute, which is nothing more than a tax, and they completely controlled it. So this is the exact same process, exact same thing that's being done, but on a much grander scale. So everyone has to be careful of what's of getting into doing business with China. You see what Elon Musk he didn't have to pay the or do the 50-50. Well, because they're still in his stuff. They're still in his, or they already had it from what they stole from GM, the technology. And because he's so high profile, they were kind of like, okay, we'll let this go. But as soon as he passes or certain other things happens, they're going to take the rest of it. They're going to switch it on him. It's a bait and switch. Now the next thing is McRaven, Kennedy, and Rob are angling to steal my ideas and work with. See here, it's my intellectual property. After they have been defaming my name for the last year or more, my feeling is they're thinking they're going to work with Prince William, more and more so, and you know, just like they did with Trade Pro Academy, jacked up the prices. You worked with Mr. Box and controlling things through that way. And this is by the behaviors of the persons at Trade Pro Academy I've watched. And if they don't, if they say I'm lying, well, okay, we can go through the discovery and we'll see what kind of communications have happened. And and I will be you'll be going against me. um, so because Kate was definitely Lady Middleton, whatever, is not too thrilled about this whole having to go to the Caribbean, and and then you have the Guardian UK or the Daily Mail is actually all the pages. Oh, they're doing everything wonderful. Look, oh, she held a baby in the Caribbean. A fan happened to be Caucasian. And there's one like little thing. about Lady Markle, and it's negative, and then everything's so. This is a bunch of BS. African Americans can do business with, and this is where because people say, "How do you know that McRaven's a bigot?" Remember when I was doing redhead porn? There was a redhead over there I knew, which was one of his persons, and I did that on purpose, and I watched what happened. And then the situation with at the coffee shop, they always do the same thing. Bigots believe that they have the right to interfere with your personal life. Like for instance, I have never given away my rights to my publicity, and my place being bugged, I'm not thrilled with. I will be gaining back my computer being hacked. Kennedy and McRaven have been making money off of this, so therefore, I will be recouping my money, either me and or my estate. And right now, he's probably doing a bobblehead, which is put there and you go, her. That's bobbleheading. Watch. Now he's angry. Gotcha, motherfucker. Because some dipshit's rolling by me. Oh, I'm beating you. No, you're not. Psychopaths, which are bigots, always do the exact same thing. They can't are not a person. They are an externalized self. They have to constantly keep feeding because they are not a real person. They're always greedy, always steal your person and your personality. Rob tried to steal my personality, become who I was supposed to be. But you can never, no matter what actions, physical actions you do, you can never be a person because that means an internal self. And that's the thing that they're most afraid of. The Sith are nothing more than fear and self hatred. You know, what is it? So, right now, they thinking I'm not going to be able to make it to the, and I sure as hell I'm not going to have that streamed on my commercial property streamed, of course, streamed on my computer. They think I'm not going to be able to make it to that one. They've done everything from using Wall Street to make it look like I was a bad person when they are. And then they started it up again. They've Kathleen Kennedy and the Kardashians and Raven have libeled, slandered. Just it's been nonstop for the whole year. And now they're switching it up to try to re-colonize or start the same shitty behavior to the Commonwealth, which will over which will actually make things worse because they the Commonwealth have these countries don't have to do business with Britain. If you're going to be enslaved, which way are you going to go? And that's what if McRaven works with Kate because she's a straight up bigot. She's hating the fact that there are limits that over the centuries limits have been placed on the crown, and if she turns into a tyrant, William will be. She whispers into William's ear, and he does not have the backbone because she's going to create. Because Rob was always he used to say, "I'm an instigator." Okay, she's going to instigate something. She's going to piss William off. William's going to act like an idiot, and the Britons will get rid of their monarch. And or the The Commonwealth will say, screw you, we're going to find other trading partners. Because these are free countries. And there's one thing about a free person is they will not become unfree without a fight. Kathleen Kennedy, and they're keeping, they raped this girl, and then they protected this woman, I should say, protected this gangbanger, so that way they can still keep African Americans thinking, well, this is your best. The other thing Ray McRaven's trying to do is keep this guy. Don't get me wrong, Dave. I know you're probably listening to this. Good dude, but where I need to go, we're completely different, and I don't don't really want you around me. To be honest with you, and probably get killed, but that's fine. That's on me. I can make my own decisions. That whole ride or die bullshit that you Californians do, that's just very anathema to me. And two, it's mostly for McRaven. And then he say he will always have that association, and then he'll use that externalized association to do more crazy, nasty shit. That's how. Remember, that's how psychopaths thinks. And yes, he is a psychopath. And he would say, "Well, that's that I'm externalizing, or I'm saying this. All right, my hypothesis is." So I would now ask that you take the Dr. Hare PCL test as an objective measure of my hypothesis. So that's all I have for this. Oh, the if the January 6th Commission has believed that it's ready, it's spring, and the we need to know, did the former president of the United States, how far involved was he in attempting to overthrow the United States government? And what were their findings to answer that question? And the three basic questions of logic: does it exist? Does it exist universally? And how does that exist in its existence? How does it connect to something? So there is such that, there exists such that, and if then, blah blah blah. It's, I gotta get back to my logic. It's been a while. But those three basic questions answered will determine the fate of this country and pretty much the fate of the world, because China's watching. And if we falter, these bigots do not understand. A lot of people who do not understand technology, if we do not release the productive capacity of every single American, China's going to roll right over us. And the only way we can release the productive capacity of every single American is to finally deal with this made up thing called racism, which is nothing more than an easy way for cluster B persons to externalize their worst selves and compete when they can't compete. Oh, one other thing I remembered: Belarus, the persons in Belarus, as I said, Putin is prepping the Russian population for a NATO to go to war with NATO. But one thing in Belarus, they're going to send your children, your sons and daughters to die against your other Slavic brothers and sisters. The choice that Belarusians have is, do they want their sons and daughters to die in the land of their brothers and sisters, or are they going to stand up against their dictator, that Putin's puppet, and not allow this to happen? If they're going to die, should they die at home, protecting themselves from a dictator from afar, or are they going to send them to die in another land, attacking their brothers and sisters? That's only an answer that they must make. But either way, Putin's going to use the Belarusian troops as he's now degraded. You're looking at 40, 50,000 wounded, 7 to 10,000 dead of a 150,000 person force. If Ukraine can hold out for another month, get that number up to 75,000 wounded, he's going to have to start throwing more. And at that point, Ukraine can just start pushing back and rolling them over. Putin's going to get really, really pissed off. If the West shows weakness and China thinks it can get away with it, they will either send more, they'll send troops to help. In the Korean War, China, even though they're not technically up to what the West can do as far as military yet, they'll use it as a testing ground. In the Korean War, the Chinese were told, just pick up the rifle of the guy who falls in front of you and keep going. That mindset will still be used. As Xi keeps writing in all his writings, keeps placing this statement, socialism with Chinese characteristics. Well, we know what socialism is, but what are the Chinese characteristics? And that's what it means back to that 5,000 year time to present. You have to, and then also he also has all of his ministers reading a lot of Chinese history and philosophy. Understanding this gives you a better understanding if the West falters, if the Indo-Pacific falters, if Africa falters. It is the natural thing for power to want more power. We falter, we give power. There will always be dictatorships, but there will not always be democracies. Democracy is a choice, and they're harder than a dictatorship because you don't get to have excuses. You have to participate. Anyways, Slava Ukraine, glory to democracy. May the flag forever wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave.